I was staring down the barrel of a gun. Not in some back alley. Not during a robbery. Not even in some war zone. No, this was on my own land, in broad daylight, with the sun high above my 150-year-old ranch that's been in my family longer than most of this town has existed. And the person holding that gun? A woman in a crisp blue HOA windbreaker, screaming at me to hand over my property or else. Yeah, you heard that right. The Homeowners Association, the very people who fine residents for painting their mailbox the wrong color, had just escalated things into full-blown insanity. Let me tell you how we got here. My name's Cole Branson. I'm a fourth-generation rancher living on 112 acres of land just outside a little town called Millstone Ridge. My great-grandfather bought this land back in 1874, when it was nothing but dirt roads and open sky. Over the years, we built it up. We've got horses, cattle, 3 barns, 2 pastures, and a historic farmhouse that could be in magazines if it weren't so damn old. I live out here with my wife, Leah, and our 2 dogs. We mind our own business, take care of our animals, and live off the land like my folks did before me. Life was peaceful until about 2 years ago. That's when the developer showed up. The county sold a chunk of land north of my ranch to a real estate developer. Within months, they slapped up a whole community of look-alike houses with tiny lawns and ridiculous names like the estates at Whispering Pines. You know the type: pastel stucco, overpriced, and soulless. And of course, they came with a homeowners association. Now at first, I didn't care. Why would I? Their community stopped at my fence line. But the problem started quick. Their president, a woman named Sandra Keller, made it her mission to act like she ran the entire county. She sent me letters, then emails, then actual visits. Every time it was the same. Your barn is an eyesore. Your fence is not compliant with HOA standards. Your animals are too loud. And every single time I told her the same thing. I'm not part of your HOA. This is private land. Back off. But Sandra didn't like being told no. One morning, I woke up to find HOA violation signs nailed to my fence posts. I ripped them down, furious. Then I saw something worse. A certified letter saying I was being fined $9,400 for continued property noncompliance. I laughed at first, but then I realized they weren't joking. They'd filed with the town trying to rezone my land as part of their HOA district. They wanted to annex my ranch. How the hell do you annex a 150-year-old private ranch? I stormed down to the county office and raised hell. Turns out, Sandra had convinced a junior city planner that my property was within natural boundary extension limits. Complete garbage, but technically plausible. I got a lawyer. We fought it. It was dismissed. I thought that'd be the end of it. I was very wrong. 3 months later, I was coming back from the feed store when I saw a white SUV parked outside my gate. 2 people in HOA jackets were standing by the entrance. Sandra was one of them. The other was a man I didn't recognize, tall, sunglasses, armed. I pulled up in my truck, and Sandra walked right up like she owned the place. We're here to take final possession. You've ignored our notices. I blinked. Final possession of what? Your ranch, she said. We've filed foreclosure. I laughed. You can't foreclose on land you don't own. Get off my property. Then the guy next to her, the tall one, pulled a pistol from his jacket and pointed it at me. Sir, don't make this harder than it has to be, he said. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just some legal stunt. They were trying to intimidate me into surrendering. I reversed out of that driveway, so fast I nearly hit my own mailbox. Back at the house, I called the sheriff. Guess what? The deputy they sent was from the same neighborhood HOA. He said it was a civil matter and wouldn't even take my statement. So now I was on my own. The HOA had declared war, and I was the only one standing in their way. That's when my wife said something that changed everything. She handed me a folder and said, I found something interesting in the property records. Turns out, the land their entire HOA community was built on used to be part of our ranch. Back in the 1970s, my grandfather sold off a strip of acreage to the county, which they later sold to the developer. But there was a catch, a clause in the deed. It said that if any community formed on that land and tried to interfere with the operation of the ranch, the original owner, that's me, had the first right to purchase the land at assessed value. The clause had never been triggered. Until now. And that's when I knew how I'd end this. I went straight to my lawyer, and we filed a petition to enforce the original deed clause. Within 2 weeks, I had court approval. I could legally purchase the land under that HOA, at today's assessed value, not market value. And thanks to a quiet deal I made with the bank, who hated the HOA for their own reasons, I got financing lined up overnight. It cost me more than I ever imagined spending on people I couldn't stand, but I bought the whole damn HOA. Every single parcel, every lot, the streets, the green belts, the clubhouse. Mine. The day the paperwork cleared, I showed up at Sandra Keller's house. Not at the gate this time. I knocked on her pastel green door with a smile on my face. She opened it and froze. I held up the title packet. "Hi, Sandra," I said. "Just wanted to let you know you're now trespassing on my property. You've got 30 days to vacate." She turned red. You can't do this." "Oh, I already did," I said. "By the way, that gun stunt you pulled? I sent footage to the sheriff. And since you're no longer protected by the HOA board immunity, they're pressing charges." She tried to fight it, of course. Filed complaints, threatened lawsuits. But there was nothing she could do. Her power was tied to the HOA, and I was the HOA now. Every complaint she filed, it came to me. Every appeal she made, denied by me. Eventually, she packed up and left. So did the guy with the gun. Turns out he wasn't licensed for private security. He got arrested. And me. I bulldozed their community clubhouse and turned it into a hay barn. Then I opened the gates and let my horses graze right through Whispering Pines. People started noticing the changes almost immediately. The same residents who used to ignore me at the feed store were now showing up at my gate, not to complain, but to beg. Turns out Sandra had been terrorizing them too, just in smaller, quieter ways. Finding people for flowers that weren't HOA approved. Threatening to foreclose over basketball hoops. Harassing a widow for painting her shutters navy blue instead of Millstone HOA sky gray. Most of them never even knew how deep her control went. And now they wanted to know, what happens to us? I didn't want to be some tyrant like Sandra. So I did the one thing she never had the decency to do. I called a community meeting. We set up folding chairs on the ranch lawn under the big oak tree by the horse corral. About 80 residents showed up. I stepped up to a crate and told them the truth. That I now legally owned the HOA. That I had the power to dissolve it. That everything she built, the fines, the threats, the absurd rules, could disappear if we wanted them to. The place went quiet for a second, and then someone clapped. Then another. And before I knew it, the entire crowd was on their feet, cheering. These people didn't want control, they wanted peace. Just like I did. And they'd been prisoners in their pastel-colored neighborhood for too long. But not everyone was happy. A few former board members were furious. One guy, Brent, shouted that I was violating procedure. That this wasn't legal, that I couldn't just take over and change everything. I calmly reminded him that he was technically standing on my land now, and he had about 60 seconds before I escorted him off it. He left, cursing the whole way. The rest stayed behind, shook my hand, and thanked me. That night, I filed the paperwork to formally dissolve the HOA charter. It was over, or so I thought, because a week later, I got a letter in the mail. Not from Sandra, but from a law firm in Dallas representing an anonymous investor group who claimed they were entitled to damages due to the destruction of a community management system they had interest in. I laughed at first. Another stunt, I figured, but the more I read, the more serious it looked. This wasn't some HOA trick. This was a corporate-level attack. Someone big had their hooks in this neighborhood, and I had just burned down their playground. I handed the letter to my lawyer, Roger, a guy who's been with me through everything. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening. "This is serious," he finally said. "Looks like someone bought controlling financial interest in the HOA before your acquisition, and now they want to be paid for the loss of its future revenue. They're going to sue Cole, and they've got teeth." I wasn't scared, but I'll admit I was rattled. This wasn't some neighbor with a clipboard. This was a legal machine, one that saw money slipping away and wanted blood in return. We had to work immediately. Roger dug into the paperwork trail while I pulled every document, every receipt, every county record I had. And that's when we found the gem, a clause buried in the old HOA charter that Sandra had never updated. It stated that the HOA was nonprofit and existed only to maintain communal harmony and shared infrastructure. Meaning, if it ever became a revenue-generating enterprise, it violated its own founding documents. And Sandra, she had been collecting thousands in fines and even renting out the clubhouse for cash events. That was enough. Roger prepared our defense, and I prepared the press release. Because if these corporate goons wanted to fight, I was going to give them one they'd regret. I didn't just respond to the lawsuit. I exposed it. We contacted local news stations. We showed them the documents, the footage of Sandra threatening people, the fines, the forged signatures, the fake compliance inspectors she'd hired without a license. One news segment turned into 4, and then a national show picked it up. I watched in stunned silence as my ranch, my story, aired on a national channel, exposing the shady underbelly of HOA power abuse across the country. People online were furious. Viewers from all over sent messages of support, donations, and legal offers. Turns out, millions of Americans were fed up with their own HOAs, and this was their rallying cry. The investor group? They dropped the lawsuit within a week. But one person didn't back down. Sandra. She'd vanished right after I took over the HOA, but now she was back, and she was madder than ever. One morning I woke up to find a burned patch of field out by the south fence. Horses spooked. Fence cut. A small, handwritten sign hung from the post. This isn't over. We checked the cameras. It was her. I called the sheriff, handed over everything, and they put out a warrant for arson and trespassing. But Sandra didn't go far. She wasn't hiding. She was waiting. A few nights later, I heard the dogs barking like crazy. I grabbed my shotgun and walked out to the porch. And there she was, standing by the gate, alone. No HOA jacket, no clipboard, just a woman who'd lost everything and wanted revenge. And I wasn't about to let her get it. She didn't say a word at first, just stood there gripping the rusted wire gate, eyes locked on mine like some ghost from a war I thought was over. Her hair was messy, wind whipping through it, and she looked thinner, worn down. Not the HOA queen in heels and sunglasses, just Sandra, raw and dangerous. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice level. She stepped forward. "You humiliated me, took everything I built. You tried to steal my land." I shot back, pointed a gun at me on my own property. "You're lucky you're not in prison." Her jaw clenched. "I gave this neighborhood order, structure. You turned it into chaos." "No," I said, stepping off the porch and walking toward her. "I gave people their freedom back. You ruled with fear. That's not order. That's control." She reached into her coat pocket, and I gripped the shotgun tighter. But this time, it wasn't a weapon. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, a handwritten note. She tossed it at my boots. Then she turned and walked into the night. I picked up the paper. Just 4 words scratched into it. "You haven't won yet." I stood there for a long time after she left, watching the tree line, listening to the quiet creak of the windmill spinning in the distance. And I realized something. This fight, it was never just about property lines or community rules. It was about people like her, the ones who think power gives them permission to break others. But folks like me, we don't break. We rebuild. Weeks passed. Sandra was picked up by deputies 2 towns over, tried to fight them too. She's facing multiple charges now. The HOA, officially dissolved. The neighborhood now votes on everything, fair and open. And the ranch, still mine, still strong, just like my family always meant it to be. If you enjoyed this wild ride and want more real justice stories like this one, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. We've got plenty more where this came from. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.